in all about people and the different. Oh, did you want to run through cabin pressure one?
Yeah.
I'll leave that to you.
I think for those, for those who aren't familiar, and I'll touch on it shortly around in a second as well, there's a new ISO standard that was published last year, and it works a lot on air quality in cabins and segregating worker from the hazardous environment on outside. And there's different systems in place, both OEM and also retrofits around doing that. But the base of it largely is pressurising the cabin, so having a higher pressure inside compared to outside, so that clean air is leaking through the grommets and seals to the outside environment, as opposed to that dirty air from outside leaking inside into the cabin. And we've had, we've done countless monitoring events on workers in cabins over the years, and we find the odd exceedance or elevated result in those environments, and we can often find that it's down to poor cabin sealing, so seals are degraded, or there's perhaps the grommets are in place from some retrofits on that particular piece of plant, and so we find those in isolation by and large, and so the clients have requests to us about, well, how do we continuously monitor and don't just rely on a smoke test, every 1,000-hour test, for instance? How do we look at that more commonly and help our workers give reassurance that that control is working permanently, and that we've got some independent validation of that and independent data to do that? So very similarly to the fixed point dust monitoring, is taking that information with small sensors that are installed inside of plant, and there are different ways to do that work. You can integrate it to the IVMS within the actual vehicle itself, but that's often been proved difficult from our clients, and quite a large capital project to go about doing that work. So they turn to us and ask if there's a small sensor network that can be installed separately into the plant themselves, so that can be monitored continuously. And you're looking at sort of what that looks like at a basic level there in those images, with a small sensor that size of a mobile phone that's installed inside of the cabin temporarily or permanently, with a small hose that then is squeezed through an existing grommet or a new grommet within that piece of plant, to be able to get that data continuously monitored, sent back via radio frequency to a gateway, and then sent off site, so that it can be centralised and dashboarded and analysed in all the same ways that Adam mentioned previously in the fixed point monitoring of what does that data mean and how to interpret that, what set points are used to create alarms and for action to occur if necessary, if that's deemed relevant during pre-planning of deployment works. And really that kind of is aiming towards meeting. We've been doing this prior to that ISO standard 23875 landing last year. We've been doing this for a good 2-3 years now, of installing these sensors in to get that information. But it's really sort of moving towards demonstrating compliance against that standard of keeping a set threshold of pressure, positive pressure inside the cabin in comparison to outside environment, and so that control can be verified across a fleet or a cross section of a fleet. But we're also finding in consultation with our clients that it's been useful information for them to use in relation to filter change out life cycles. So, what's the green in period of the filter, and then when's it stabilise, and then based on the environment, when does that filter for that cabin potentially require change out? And is it before what the OEM has given in guidance, or in some instances it's being able to extend beyond the life of that, so that they can, have a lower cost of managing that piece of plant with change out of filters, which can be quite expensive, particularly for HEPA grade filters as well. And it just limits that kind of live reactive maintenance, particularly in larger organisations with downtime being quantified. Can be quite expensive, and if workers have got reassurance around the control effectiveness of that cabin, then it helps to minimise some of that reactive tagging out of plant, because there's concerns over the air conditioning system or the cabin seal, which we sort of see continuously across industry across Australia. Installation of the devices is a pretty can be pretty covert, so they're installed in the cab and sort of in semi-permanent or permanent type installations. Normally keep them out of the way somewhere so the worker doesn't bump them behind the seats or underneath the dash point. And in fact, we find that a lot of our clients will have a OEM have a retrofitted positive pressure cabin system like a Breathe Safe or a RESPA installed, and we'll have challenges with hooking it up to the IVMS or downloading that data by USB. So they'll instead look to us for some independence to be able to facilitate that data and have a sensor network in their plant, so they can call that information back and have that centrally managed rather than having to manually do that themselves. So those installations are pretty quick and simple. There's videos on those on how to do that installation to make it nice and simple to be done in-house. And that data gets presented back into a centralised dashboard, which again, the benefit is we've got the ability to be able to update and create those dashboards depending on the appetite of the site, maturity, so how much information is relevant. We don't want to overload that viewpoint, but keep it simple with some traffic lighting is generally how that's done, and you can then inquire and see the data in more detail and break it down over date ranges and the likes, almost identically to the previous demo that Adam just did on the fixed point monitoring. But the beauty about having in-house capability to update these dashboards is that we kind of build them as the maturity journey goes along for each client, and sort of specifically to each of the pieces of plant as well, so that information is nice and relevant and usable and valuable to go forward. So that's an existing example there, just sort of flashing up on the screen with, for a lot of those, a 20 Pascal, which is a very small amount of pressure, but used as a threshold there, but it depends on the systems. Some systems will have quite different ones. Before sort of moving on to the next piece, I guess just noting there too, Shelley, there's a new committee being started up on the back of that ISO standard, looking at specifically this piece of work around cabin air quality. So looking at dust, CO2, and pressure for continuous monitoring. So that will obviously take quite a period of time for that to come to completion. It'll be the life cycle of those types of committees are years, but there was a huge appetite from mining industry to be more specific on how to monitor in cabins continuously and what does that data mean and what thresholds to set. So there's additional guidance or additional standard to come at some point, but that will take a good couple of years for that to materialise within the ISO world, just given the extensive nature of developing documents and reviewing them and publishing them within that sphere. But hopefully it brings some additional guidance in the meantime, because it is somewhat lacking in this space. The next example of solutions that partner with clients is around controlling of worker exposures, and you'll see this one's actually got a different branded piece of work on it with Exposy. It's the name of the software that we have developed, and I guess before sort of getting into that and handing over to Adam on what that looks like in some detail for everyone, I guess just a bit of the story about where that's originated from and why we're at this point of generating the software and communicating and discussing it more is that we've really since re-emergence of occupational lung diseases in 2016 in Queensland, unfortunately here, with coal working MAQOHSC or black lung, and then the continuation of those discovering those lung diseases. We've seen a huge demand in our space, being specialists in particulates in mining, construction, manufacturing, to control worker exposure, and that the existing controls just clearly weren't enough to manage those exposures, and it's led to a situation which I get asked about, every single time I go on site is just, Dusty, which controls work, mate? Like, just let me know so we can put them in place. And unfortunately, dust is very complicated and difficult, and it's not as simple as this one control is going to work everywhere and every time. It requires some sort of niche bespoke work to be able to make sure those controls are fit for purpose for operations. And I guess the lag in current assessment techniques has been exposed more and more so with that appetite to put in place controls really rapidly. So a time lag and the information that we're not able to see down to what tasks are contributing to exposure. We take 35,000 personal samples a year, so we're very experienced in what those limitations look like and the challenges we're getting to that next sort of information around what causes those exposures, and how can you then translate that to control. And we've constantly been working towards this real-time space to be able to help solve that. And industry has absolutely followed suit, and it's a huge appetite right now for real time. I'm sure each of you are talking about it on sites, and I get phone calls every week about which device to buy, Dusty, and which one works better than the other. And I've got this new device that marketing guys put on the table for me. Is it the right one? And I think the question certainly isn't which is the right device. The question is, what am I seeking to achieve, and then matching the right device to it. And that lesson learned has been learned, unfortunately, way too many times with failed deployments, and that's largely down to the fact that we've got a lack of reputable guidance and training material in market. So there's a bit of wild west happening in this space. It's moving faster than what regulators and guideline setters, standard developers can do, and it's really been quite reliant on people like us to help educate industry, and also in our interests, also building out solutions to be able to make that easy for industry to be able to have a successful embedment, because we've unfortunately seen all too often failed deployments in place, in particularly in the mining sector in Australia, who's doing some of the leading work on that around the world. And like I alluded to earlier, we're collaborating internationally, and people are using our data and information and insights around the globe to help build out that research and also guidance material as well, because it's certainly much needed. So that's kind of the sort of lead into the conversation around our software, and Adam will continue on with sort of explaining what that looks like and what we've been able to produce.
Thanks, Dusty. So I'm going to assume you're all familiar with the traditional way of doing hygiene monitoring, which is coming out to site, putting a sample on someone, and then letting them do their shift for the day, getting the sample back at the end, and then sending it off to a lab to get your results back in about 4 weeks or so. So that gives you a broad look at what a particular group of workers is exposed to after you've done those assessments over, like a 1 to 2 year period, to give you a good spread of what they do. And then we do some stats on it to give you like a rough guide as to where that group of workers sits with regards to an exposure standard. So real-time monitoring, or real-time task-based monitoring, basically fast tracks you straight to looking at controls and identifying issues and controlling them as soon as possible. So we have SEGs on site that we already know, so similar exposure groups on site, groups of workers that are getting exceedances, or their group of, that group of workers is constantly getting an exceedance here and there, or they have elevated results. What we can do is go and break down the tasks that they do, and then go take what we call a video exposure measurement of that task. And this is an example of a task the guys on site do about once a week, and they blow out their air compressor filter with the compressed air from it. And then, that's a quarry where you've got an insane level of silica content inside that crushed rock. So that's a task that they had hidden away, that no one was really, it only takes about 2 minutes. And then we wonder, you wonder why this particular maintenance seg is always going over. And then they show you what they do. And it's like, oh, let's not do that, guys. But now we've got some evidence to show that this is one of the tasks that's, potentially causing an exceedance. And we look at how can we do that more safely, and then show what that looks like, and give the guys a visual as to the difference between the two things. So there's the original task on the left, and then this one on the right is we basically suggested that they use washable filters that they can swap out and just alternate between. So they have a clean one that can be washed, and then a dirty one that they go and wash, and then they swap the two. So as he goes along, hopefully you can see him. He'll go and pick that one up and go and wash it. And you can see the difference in the respirable aerosol results here. Like we're talking up to like 18 milligrams on in the middle one here, which gets even worse when he goes inside that little cubby there that's housing it. And on the right here, once he starts using a hose to wash out that filter, which is a different type of filter to what was used before, so it doesn't break down with water, you can see his exposure is almost completely eliminated. So using that, they can pretty much, take a business case and go, we need to replace our filters with this and come up with a better, setup that we can just wash these filters quickly. And the guys are like, oh yeah, I'll do it that way. It makes way more sense. So yeah, it's just about like both communication and solving problems, which, you can put whatever control you want in, but if the guys don't want to use it, that's a whole different story. So here's another example that we had a case study with one of our clients where they were doing tire rim buffing, so cleaning out the gunk from truck tire, truck rim. And they usually use like a cordless grinder. They go around the rim and they, buff out all the rust. And we tried a whole bunch of different things with them. So just the standard one here, you can see they're getting like 40 milligrams of fine particulate that you can barely see in the video, but that's what the monitor's picking up. Then we tried on-tool extraction, which the guys did not like, but it knocked about half of the dust out of the equation. And then they just tried wetting it with the hose before they started, and that knocked pretty much all the dust out. As long as they took a pause every 10 minutes to wet it down again, it remained that low. So that was a massive benefit for them to understand that. So that's the way of going about doing the monitoring and the new type of monitoring that we're trying to do, focusing on tasks and controls. What we did is make an application, a solution that allows clients to store all of that information that we've captured in a systemized way. So hopefully I've got the next slide here. So we put together the world's first real-time monitoring solution that captures everything from seg down to measurements. So where all of your exposures are. You can look at analytics for all the different measurements you've added in. You can see your top 10 highest tasks, your top 10 highest measurements. You can compare different tasks with different controls. You can keep a register of all those controls that you've implemented, and show evidence that you've been working on those over time to bring dust down for particular work groups. It is a fully systemized experience to help industry control their risk to respirable dust and take out the guesswork out of using this stuff. For example, if you had a hygienist on site today that wanted to go out and do these type of measurements, they would basically have to work out a way to combine the two things together and then provide you with like a video file and then have to explain what all that means, and then you store it wherever you want. Whereas in this case, you can have whatever hygienist you want, upload measurements into our software, and then keep a track of everything that's been done and have it all done automatically, and you can control most of it, or pretty much all of it. So it's completely, you can use whatever real-time devices you want, you can use whatever video monitors you want, and it all just gets amalgamated in our solution. I'll give you a live demo because it's a lot. It'll make more sense. There's a lot to kind of articulate in 1 second. But this is just a recap of exactly what I've been talking about. So existing is non-control focused. It's an overview of what your exposures are. You've got to wait a long time to get data back, and you need a hygienist to be helping you do this. Future, we can basically give a worker, and most of our assessments are done by the worker. We give them the real-time monitor. They turn the camera on. They start their real-time monitor. They come back to us when they've done the task, and we just take notes of observations, or they can do it. And then we upload it into Exposy, and then we provide analysis on there, or you can put in your comments against what was happening in the task, and then create a report that you can share around. or you can share a link to the video that's been created. We call it a video exposure measurement, or which is a VEM, and that can be sent out with a password on it. And then you can also do comparisons between different tasks and measurements to show the difference between controls. And yeah, you don't have to wait. It's instant. As soon as you finish your measurement, you can go chuck it in and have a look at it. And I've done so many assessments in the field. The engagement with workers is insane. Like, all they want to do is see themselves on camera. They want to see what's going on. They want to try something different. And then they want that video played in front of all their mates so they can all look at it. So I will give you a quick live demo of it.
Just while Adam's doing that, just to clarify too, there's the traditional monitoring which is undertaken. That's not going to be replaced by this technique, particularly not anytime soon. There's a hardware gap to overcome at this point in time, but not saying that this will replace your regulatory needs around doing personal exposure monitoring with traditional techniques. Our interest is putting in place controls as efficiently and as quickly as possible by using these new tools, and so that those controls can be shared and information as lessons learned are shared across industries in Australia, abroad as well. But certainly not replacing the traditional monitoring technique anytime soon with that.
Cool. So this is our live software right now. So hopefully nothing explodes whenever you try and do a live run through. But basically, we've got a welding task being done here, just to give you an idea, because it's nice and visual. I like to use this one just to explain it. So we've got a video here and the real-time data down the bottom. We can play those two things together, and you can see the line will move down with the assessment being done, and you can kind of click around and jump around in there. It might look a bit slow, choppy on your screen, but that's just the way Teams shows videos. It's as smooth as all the other stuff I was showing you, but it's just a limitation of Teams. So this is just an assessment being played. In here, we've got, we can put comments against moments on the graph. So we could, click here and say that this is, caused by welding. And then that gets saved and you can see where that comment was added. We can include photos of that assessment. We can do some analysis of the real-time data. We can use like excursion limits and OES to compare that. We can apply calibration factors. We can include all the different controls that are being used in here and store information about them. And then just general details, but this is obviously a demo. We can also make like a little highlight just of the moment that we wanted to send to someone. So I can crop from here to there, and I've already done that. And that's one of these highlight videos here that can play in a separate video, and you can just share that. So you can create a share link with a password and click that off to someone. But I've actually done 3 of these assessments already. So I did a no control, and then I did an LEV with LEV, and then with on gun extraction. And I wanted to compare the 3 of them to see what the difference was, so I can make a comparison. And here you've got no control, LEV, on gun. And you can see the difference going from no control to LEV is like 25 times reduction, and then on gun is almost 500 times reduction in exposure, which is pretty cool. And then you can view that video. So we can actually play them all at the same time, all done by the app, all done by Exposy, and then play them all together and see the difference. And again, it'll be a little bit choppy because of Teams, but you can have that playing on, like, you can send this link to someone just to run through like the difference in that particular task that you're looking at. You can just have it looping in a presentation if you wanted to, and just set it to 5 seconds and just let it go, and it'll just keep going on and on and on. And it'll kind of show those reduction factors down the bottom. So yeah, it's all kind of built in to the system. There's so much more in here as well, including all the, like if you were if you had multiple sites you were looking at, you could perform analytics across all the different measurements and tasks that you've done in like box and whisker plots. You've also got all the control management features from site, and there's so many bits and pieces that I could run through, but it'll burn a lot of time, so I won't do that. But yeah, you can run a report straight from here. You can share all this information. It's all readily available. This is the view that any of our clients gets, and they can muck around with the data as well. So yeah, that was just a quick little run through. Share the preso again. You go.
Cool. So that was a quick demo of that particular product exposure. But like I kind of mentioned earlier on the slides around some of the pillars of work that we're doing, it became really evident early on that if there's new things being used and sort of transitioning to some different techniques from old, and I guess also just around old hazards being learnt in new lights of information as well. That learning was a critical part of that journey to be able to support that and underpin that. So we've also internally built our capability to build out training tools so that we can help to succinctly communicate whether it be hazards or whether it be actual techniques, so around how to use those particular real-time monitoring devices so that they can be operationalized. So if you purchase a particular unit, then be able to train at different levels, whether it be workers who are wearing it through to the maybe health and safety person or engineer or supervisor who's facilitating that program or hygienist. Train them in how to use that particular device to a base level competency, and have an assessment in there so that you've got some control over that level of training, because that's certainly been a lesson learnt from the sort of countless deployments we've done in this space over the last 3-4 years in particular. But also building out those packages for internal use. So we've got clients who are adapting packs that we've got to be able to put their own labelling and own systems and own information within those so that they can put them onto their own internal learning management system or LMS. And for those who are interested in, particularly in this space around real time, we're currently in the throes of developing a more holistic training package on real time. There's nothing currently on market, and as leaders in this space globally, we feel sort of pretty uniquely placed to be able to build out a training pack in that space and collaborating internationally on that. So that'll take some time. It's not going to be done in the next month or two, but that's currently in motion now. We'll be building that pack out so that it can support and underpin all the good work to come in this space, and it's certainly moving very, very, very rapidly at the moment. But you can see some of the packs there we've got pre-existingly in this space, and there's some other ones there around WHS as well, and obviously client packs there that we can't share from their side. That's sort of the run through of the solutions as we put it to Shelley and just some of the work that we do. And I guess just in closing, before we open up to questions, if anyone's got any questions around those particular products or solutions that we've got that we've been able to build in combination with support from our clients. And we've got a national BDM who wasn't able to make it today, unfortunately. He had a personal a family matter to attend. But Simon's certainly more than happy to assist with any queries you've got. His details are up there on the screen if you'd like to jot those down, and I'll leave that there for a couple more seconds before I sort of close off the camera and you can see our faces again. But I guess it's probably opening up to questions from there, Shelley and the team, and happy to take any feedback as well.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you very much for the presentation.